The following is a conversation with Shaheen ABDULLAH. He's an experienced people analytics lead currently based out of Paris. He specializes in applying data analysis and visualizations in the field of HR. His primary career goal is to harness HR data and harmonize it with finance and operations data to optimize for business outcomes. Throughout his career, he successfully contributed to leading multinational companies in cybersecurity, insurance, and transportation across Paris, Munich, Geneva, and Toronto. If you're a working professional who's looking to switch careers into the tech industry, data analytics is the perfect career for you. Low prerequisite knowledge, high ROI on time. I have all the video timestamps in the description down below. Be sure to skip to the end part where Shaheen explains how you can make a transition into the field of data analytics. Aside from that, hope you guys enjoy the show. So hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Life Tech and Beyond podcast. Today I have a special guest. I'm joined by Shaheen ABDULLAH. So welcome to the show, Abdullah.
Thank you very much.
I guess we'll just start right off from the basics. Can you just tell us what you do, what company you work in, what's your day-to-day like, and then we'll go off from there.
Of course. So my name is Shaheen. Thank you so much for the invitation, Mohammed, for having me in this podcast. Really grateful. So basically, I'm a people analytics lead for a company called Transdev. It's a leader in public transportation worldwide. It's the number one. And basically, I work in HR data. I always say I'm half data analyst, half data scientist for HR, which is a field where there's a lot of work to do because it's not an area in the business where people have those type of hard skills. Because, for instance, you would expect those type of skills maybe in finance or supply chain or operations, but in HR, it's not a field where you have a lot of people with like technical skills. So I think this would be my added value in this position. But basically, I try to use HR data to close the ties with the business. So, for instance, in a company, you have like a headcount, which is a metric that measures the number of employees in a company. How can we optimize every metric, every HR metric, such as absenteeism rate, turnover, work accidents, the percentage of promotions, all those type of HR metrics to try to derive meaning in the business. So, for instance, how can we make profits out of HR metrics? So, you do this by doing correlations. So, by using, for instance, you can do correlation matrix plots on Power BI. This is one way to do it. But you can also test hypotheses. So, this is something you could do in Python or in R, where you try to see if there is a positive correlation and if there's actual hypothesis that can be proved when you try to pose a hypothesis for the business. So this would be my angle of approach in the company. My company has 100,000 employees. It's located in like 19 countries. So I'm the project manager for a scope of like the seven locations where we generate the most revenue, where we have the main workforce. Other than that, I have worked in several countries, several big companies. So if you want me to talk about this later on, of course, no
Sure,
problem.
yeah, we can
And
dive
to
into
respond
that,
to
yeah.
your last question, what is a day-to-day or week look like? Basically, I try to, right now, the project, why they hired me from Canada. And the objective is for me to build the groundwork for analytics in the company, because the company has a poor data literacy. And this is something which we face a lot, because everybody wants in big companies to have fancy dashboards, all like, for instance, they want machine learning, they want generative AI now, etc. But first, the data is very poor, the data quality is very poor. And secondly, even when we provide such tools to the business, sometimes the adoption of the tools we provide are not even following. So that's why usually data analysts and data consultants notice that there's also another type of work, which is the work on culture. Like, you need to work on changing the culture, bringing change management to the population you're working with, so that you educate them to use those tools. And this is a parallel work. I try to build the dashboards, use the data, clean the data, etc., worldwide. But at the same time, so I work with a team of I'm a project manager, so I have people in every country. But at the same time, I have to also think of the aspect where I need to train the HR population, before they take a decision, they need to look at the metrics, because here it's just an instinctive type of decision. So that's why I have two type of hats, where I try to work on the hard skills, but also on the soft skills of the people surrounding me.
So are you primarily managing? Like, what's your primary function? Or you mentioned you build dashboards and stuff. Is that the main
Yeah, yeah.
chunk of the work, or is it management?
First, my position when I applied, I was supposed to be a pure data analyst, a pure HR data analyst, but taking on the position. So I have a few responsibilities, first of all. For instance, every company, especially in the European zone, have to disclose every year a financial report and a non-financial extra report. It's an European mandatory requirement. So basically, it's a report where every company which has more than 250 employees, they have to communicate to investors and clients a lot of KPIs on, for instance, if I'm talking about the financial report, this would be, for instance, the earning before interest and taxes, the profit and loss report, etc. But for me, I'm in charge of the other report, which is called the non-financial report. So this links up to something which we call CSR. Maybe you're familiar with this notion. And the CSR is basically, the C stands for corporate, S for social, and R for responsibility. It's for me, I'm responsible for the whole metrics that the company communicates to the business. And basically, me, I'm in charge mainly of this, but also, uh, as I said, I'm a project manager, so I'm trying to build. This is the challenge when we are in big companies. It's that we do things at headquarter, but then we want the countries to follow what headquarters has decided. Why do I say this? Let's say, for instance, the CEO, there's a change of CEO, or there's a new CFO. He wants to implement a strategy, and it's very easy to take a strategy on headquarters, but then you want them to implement the strategy in every location. And for this, it's very hard. So for me, my job is that the CHRO, which is my N plus two, so the Chief Human Resources Officer, she has a strategy, and I try to implement her strategy at headquarters for every country. So I'm the group HR responsible for data analytics. So that's where I'm a bit managing people. I, I don't like the term managing, because I feel that in the old generation, especially in France, you feel like you're over someone, etc. While in reality, I feel for instance, some people which are most of my team are all older than me, and I wouldn't have that pretension. But I would say we're in the same team. I'm just trying to, since I work for headquarters, I have a bit more responsibility. So if the team fails, it's on me. So yeah.
Well, you're more resourceful, making sure people do their work rather than you actually going doing that. One thing I did want to talk about before I dive into some of my other questions is
Yeah.
you're the host of an upcoming podcast called Muslim Game Changers. Would you like to talk us through that a bit?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking about this. I really appreciate, and I really hope this podcast is gonna boom. I looked at the other episodes, and it was fire content. So I really hope you're gonna get the audience you deserve. Other than that, thank you so much. So basically, my podcast, I'm trying to launch a podcast which is called Muslim Game Changers. So guys, maybe by the time this one is up, it's gonna be up already.
Do we
And
have an
basically, the aim
estimated date for that one?
so basically, it will be by the end of August. Basically, the aim is to provide the community, whether youth or active professionals, some insights about people who have made it in the corporate world, such as Mohammed. Mohammed is part of our guest, and people who work like at Google, Deutsche Bank, some consultant companies, the big four companies, to try to see how do we get to a certain goal. So, for instance, if someone among the community is a senior consultant, how do I get there? What's the path looking like to get at the point where my older brother or sister is? So that's the intent behind my podcast. If you want to check it out, I'll be glad. You can reach me on my LinkedIn. Maybe you can put my LinkedIn. You can reach me
Sure,
out
yeah.
otherwise.
I'll do that, yeah. And then whenever the podcast is live, we can put a link in the description down below as well.
Thank you very much.
Sounds good, yeah. One question I had was regarding analytics. You mentioned you're like a half data analyst, half data scientist. And
Yeah.
so with data science, what was the journey with that? What are like some of the resources that you've used to learn data science? Because I ask
Of
in the
course.
context of AI. When learning like machine learning, data science is a big part of it. There's some data science methodologies and stuff. So what are some of the resources that you've used and people can use as well?
Of course, and I would have to say, and this is something I have thought of before coming to the podcast because I expected this question. I want to say that me, since I did not have a computer science degree, etc., I had to work to learn on my own. I think it's also your path before going into Microsoft. But me, before I was not structured in the sense that I just went on free code camp, looked at some, for instance, I would look at how do I develop a game on Python, and they would talk about Kiwi, etc. And I would be like, yeah, but what's the intent behind it? What I wanted to learn is something I could apply at work to get like promotions or things. For instance, I'm inspiring for international mobility opportunities, and I wanted to provide those quick wins where I could use data science directly for my field. I would say the number one step would be for me, for instance, data camp is the number one opportunity for me because I like to learn by doing. I have like an engineering type of mindset where I tell myself I need to learn how does something work. For instance, to tell you, this morning I was talking to my friend. I was learning about the supply chain of like the bananas, how they are transported from Africa to Europe. I was interested. I want to learn how things work. So Data Camp gave me the tools because you learn by doing stuff. So basically, you code, and they give you projects, real life projects, but of course with fake data sets, let's say. But basically, each time they give you some code, and you have to answer in order to resolve the question. And sometimes, the more you go in, and the more it's going to be harder. But at least you understand what's all the basis of programming. And I had some programming background because when I was very young, at a very young age, I used to develop on HTML, which is the most basic, simplest programming language. But then moving on, I was programming on VBA, which is the coding language of Excel. So basically, if you press Alt F11, for instance, if you have Windows, you can see the background of Excel, and basically, it's the programming language of Excel which allows you to automate all Excel. All Excel tasks. And this is something very underrated, this programming language. I wanted to drop a few words about this because yesterday I was listening to a podcast. A Google project manager was saying that, for instance, they're using Python and they're using even Excel still. So Excel is not completely a has-been type of thing. All the data mostly comes in CSV form. So I think VBA should not be underrated because it can automate a lot of things on Excel, and it could be very interesting as a project manager. Other than that, so I had a little background. This was my journey: first HTML, then VBA, and then moving on. I was interested, of course, because it's the most in. Every year, I look at the most in-demand skills, and every year I see a new ranking. And Python was among the most in demand. So I first learned on Data Camp, and secondly, I looked at, for instance, the CS50 Harvard course, which I followed entirely. I followed the course on Coursera. I think it's a great platform. There's edX and Udemy, which are also great platforms. But for instance, me, there was a guy which I followed on YouTube. I don't recall exactly his name, but basically he was using Google Colab, which is a Jupyter notebook directly implemented in your browser. So it really suited me because me, I don't have a lot of time. Sometimes I don't know, I have to move from a country to another. I don't have the time to install stuff on my computer, install the libraries, etc. And Google Colab allows you to like on an online service, you can code all that you want. And my first code was basically predicting turnover. So just to tell you a bit about this, in HR, you have all the movements in the company. So the employees moving in and out are compared to the average headcount. So, for instance, in my company, there is 100,000 employees. So the higher we get our turnover, the higher the risk for the company, because it means that the company is not we do not have the retention we are aiming at. We do not retain our employees yet enough. So my aim at ATOS, which is my previous company, was to predict the turnover. So I looked directly on YouTube. How can I predict turnover with Python? And this is what I would invite everybody listening to do, because not everyone is a software engineer or a computer science guy. Maybe some people are in supply chain and marketing, etc. Don't want to learn about data science. Learn immediately about what do you want to implement at work. Otherwise, you'll be wasting time. If you're doing like myself, learning about developing video games, etc., you're never going to implement it at work. I'm really focused on what can I implement directly at work, and this is what I've done. I learned immediately about how can I predict turnover, proposed it to my manager, and directly afterwards we were trying to see what was the financial outcome out of it. So basically the ROI of the higher turnover. And I think this is a type of mindset that people should have, that maybe some engineering type of guys don't have enough. That they do a lot of brilliant algorithm, etc. They test the accuracy of their machine learning algorithm, but then they do not promote it enough, because they don't go, for instance, to reach out to the finance department, see how much does it cost the turnover actually, how much could it cost if we reduce it, etc. So this mindset is a business mindset. So this was my reflection. How can I resolve a problem and directly implementing at work once I have learned the skills?
Well, I want to talk more about this since you mentioned turnover. What are some of the other metrics that you people work with within HR? One is, I think you mentioned
Yeah, of
before,
course.
like turnover, promotion rate, and so on. Like, what are some of the other key metrics that like all these big businesses are concerned with?
Yeah, of course. Hey, let me give you a very interesting topic, because it's true that maybe you might be unfamiliar with the HR sector. What can we use data science upon? I will give you a concrete example, which will also answer your query of about metrics. For instance, we are trying to calculate how, among a list of employees, who are the most likely to leave at what percentage in what windows of time. So, for instance, if I take the list of employees at like Transdev or Microsoft, it will tell me, okay, Mohammed is 81% likely to leave in 5 months and a half. And for this, we need to collect a lot of data points, like, for instance, the distance from your work and home, which is one factor. For instance, we're trying to collect the maximum data points and then see what correlation can we build with any data point. Another correlation is, for instance, the seniority. How many time have you spent on Microsoft? A third one would be, for instance, how many time have you spent in a position without getting a promotion? Another time without getting a salary raise. And all those data points, which are very like straight on it, you tell yourself, sometimes you even get multiple correlations. But the goal is to see what pattern can you see globally in a department, for because every department will have a different pattern. For instance, in HR or in the finance department, people will be leaving for different reasons. Maybe in finance it's because the management is terrible. So for each department you would need to implement such an algorithm. And there are new companies, new startups, for instance, which have taken this opportunity. Like, for instance, one is called Vizier. It's a Canadian startup which basically has developed a lot of algorithms and machine learning ways of defining patterns, and they're proposing to multinationals so that they can immediately get insights very quickly on a dashboard. But the most important metrics would be in HR: turnover, gender diversity, because between women and men we need to have parity between the people which are present in the company, but also the salaries. So we are trying to close the salary gap between women and men, even at top management, which is very hard. But also some things like seniority, the percentage of people who have followed the learning. And for instance, to go even deeper than that, in one of my previous companies, which was called Allianz, we are trying to evaluate the ROI of L&D programs to see how much L&D programs were rewarding the company. But I would maybe talk on this later. Maybe you have a question.
Sure, yeah, yeah. So how much of this is based on, well, all of it is based on historical data, based on like previous
Yeah.
employees and so on. how big is that window? Is it like a prediction? Like say it gives you a prediction Muhammad is likely to leave in like the next 4 years. Is that just based on the historical average, or is there like some prediction magic going on?
No, it's mostly based on historical data. So the data is trained on a historical. Every data is trained on historical, and the most frequent data we have in HR is monthly. So it can in certain countries, like for instance the Netherlands, in most companies in Europe, because I'm a European, so I will talk about the Europe part. Netherlands are very onward, so they have real time data where they can already do a day to day type of management, already anticipate what's happening. But in most countries in Europe, it's very hard because we have work councils in every. I don't know if you ever handle this, but in every country in Europe, it's very tough to bring change in data tools because people are opposed to it. So the most frequent we would have is monthly data, which is like a reporting thing, and it wouldn't be enough to train such a model, unfortunately.
I see. Yeah. Well, I didn't actually realize now that you explain it that companies like find these type of correlations between like all these data points. Like now that I think about it, it's like a whole new world, like a whole separate world for like managing employees and so on. So yeah.
Exactly. The only shame, Mohammed, I have to say is that I would say in Europe it's very hard to implement because you would be able to have use cases, for instance, a use case in the Netherlands or in Australia, but to have a global type of thing where everybody's aligned, it's almost impossible. And it's very easy to do such a thing in North America, but in Europe it's almost impossible. So that's a challenge where we have to go because we have huge data protection rules. It's very hard.
So talking about use cases, what are some of the successful use cases that you've been involved in? Like some of the work that you've done in previous companies where they've actually implemented like these data-driven strategies and like seen some positive ROI.
Of course, it's a very good question. I will go. I will give you an example, which is at Allianz, which is the number one insurance worldwide. It's a German company, and Allianz, they're very futuristic in their way of seeing things because it's a finance company. But basically, we had L&D programs, okay, that we were providing our employees, and we were trying to see how can we put a metric behind L&D programs because they are costing huge money to the company, but what approach could we have? And I was
And
reading a
what
book at
does
the time. It was called,
sorry to cut you off.
sorry.
What so can you just explain for the audience L&D what that
Yes, learning and development. So basically, whenever in a company you want to do a training, you want to train yourself, I don't know, in project management or anything, you reach out to the L&D department. So it's the learning and development department. Sorry, I was using this acronym. So basically, the L&D department, they were providing huge programs like in insurance, in finance, in asset management to the employees. It was costing a lot of money, but they had no way of quantifying it. I was reading a book at the time. It was called Work Rules by the HRD of Google, who was practicing people analytics. People analytics is really a niche. It's really, we don't have a lot of data analysts and data science in HR, but it's really something that Google has launched out. And I was reading his book at that time where he had multiple strategies to approach this. And I tried to propose to my manager, can we take for one particular L&D program, which is very popular, two population. One population which will not follow that L&D program, okay, not at all, and in the previous years has not followed this L&D program. One other population which did follow this L&D program. And basically we had two population, one which did follow this L&D program, one which did not. And after like 5 years of historical data, you would be able to see the evolution of insurance sales, because the insurance sales, it's our number one thing at Allianz, the evolution of insurance sales between the population which followed that training and the other population which did not follow the training. And by doing this difference, you can see the gap which represents the ROI to the company. But of course, it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of data analysis, etc. But that's the thing. Before doing this, their whole approach was measuring the NPS, which is the Net Promoter Score. It's something which multiple departments use. But us, it was to measure what kind of money can we have back when we invest in those trainings. So that was a huge use case, which I succeeded. I presented to the leader of Center of Expertise in HR. So yeah, this would be my response.
See, and so the one question, so this is, I assume, so this is when you worked at Allianz that you mentioned, the company.
Yeah, Allianz.
So how much of these
Yeah.
big companies do they hire people, like keep them in house to do these analytics, or do they like just like buy a software solution or like outsource it to another company? What's the scope
Yeah,
in
that's
that
an
market?
excellent question. That's an excellent question, Mohammed, because it's true that even now I'm still facing this challenge between building yourself, outsourcing, or even outsource but build with consultants which are in house. It's a huge issue, but basically in ATOS, I work for ATOS, which is the IT and cybersecurity leader. Everything was in house because we had like plenty of people in like Chennai, which is in India, Poland, which is a huge IT center. So everything that I could do, I had the profile. So it was great. Honestly, working in an IT company was really fast for me. It was really an agile type of environment. Everybody was open to change, but not all companies are like this. In Allianz, I would say it was a mid between people having the hard skills already. So, for instance, in the HR department, they would hire people from an engineering background, people from a finance background, so that they wouldn't lack the skills to perform in this skills in this department. In my current company in Transdev, almost every department has consultants. They outsource a lot. And for me, I mean, I'm not part of the executive committee or anything, but for me, it's a huge risk because basically it's great people come with their skills, etc., but then they leave and the handover is really not well done, mostly. And secondly, the company as a whole is not evolving. So in reality, you are making like you are just patching yourself of a little injury, but you are not actually healing the injury. So I would be very skeptical about this approach. But a third approach, which you mentioned, is having tools that you would approach vendors, for instance, which provide like mostly startups, which have the latest technologies. This is amazing. For instance, I've convinced my manager. We went to London to see some vendors, which there was one this year which they're really good. They have a whole team of data scientists, analysts, etc., which they do amazing stuff that we would never be able to do. So it's all about all the time within the company you are with, the company culture you're working with, assessing what's the best option in terms of you delivering the end project. So yeah.
And sorry, excuse me. And does that put your job security at a risk when companies are looking to outsource? So, like people that are like data scientists working in like the HR sector, when they look at like all these
Not
new.
personally, I would never see it that way. It's true that people sometimes, for instance, when ChatGPT got out, people had like, "Oh my God, what is happening? We're gonna lose our jobs, etc." I'm completely against that ideology. I think that with every change comes an opportunity, and just allows us to be more efficient. And not only ChatGPT, but also what you just mentioned. If I can outsource some tasks to other teams, but at the same time focus on, I don't know, more strategic things, because I'm switching where I started my career, which was very technical, very oriented towards data analysis, to now more towards management type of tasks. I tell myself it's all good. Me, it facilitates my job. It's also a win-win for the person. So me, I'm completely open to this. Yeah.
And so I'm trying to understand when so HR personnel, they try to look at all these data points to see uh, essentially the net thing that they're trying to optimize is this ROI for the company. Like what things can we do and what has happened in the past that can give us the maximum ROI. Like that's essentially
Exactly,
the.
you have perfectly understood. You have perfectly understood. It's basically every department. Whenever you, if you are not talking about ROI, you are not on the finance radar. For instance, my manager, which is the director of HR data, she is in constant calls with finance, and finance are the ones which allow you to have funds. You know, anytime you have a project, if you don't have the sponsorship of an executive and the support of finance, your project is going nowhere. So anytime you want to start a project, you have to align. This is what would be my approach if I want to start a project as of now. And if I can give some tips to people, it's that first of all, I would set appointments with an executive within reach. For instance, if I'm in Europe, the CEO of Europe, to say what are your challenges that you're facing right now, how can we help. And since he knows that I'm in HR data, he will tell me, okay, my main challenge is that we cannot hire people in this area. For instance, we cannot hire cybersecurity specialists. And he would share with me his day-to-day challenges for running his scope. And by hearing him, secondly, I would go to finance and tell them what are your challenges also and how can I help. I tried then afterwards to launch a project which meets my goals, but also the goals of the executive and the finance people, so that whenever I start a project, they see the value inside of it. And if at one point I need to pitch for a vendor, they will tell ourselves, okay, since Shaheen is providing us already analytics on, for instance, hiring KPIs or KPIs on finance, etc., we can grant him some funds because we see the value in it. So for me, having those two on board is very important in any given project.
I see. So your role is more self-driven. Like you have to be the one proactive. It's not leadership telling you, okay, now we need to measure this. Like you're the one pitching this.
Exactly. And I have to deal with something. If I have to be fully transparent, I like to be fully transparent. It's that not all leaders, and yesterday I was reading a book about people analytics. It's called The Power of People. And it explains a lot of strategy about data analysis, data science applied to HR. And they were saying that, it's true that not all executives, mostly I would say, have not got a data culture. Okay, they do not have, they have not been formed as we know with Power BI, Tableau, Alteryx. They have no knowledge of such things. So whenever they have an assumption about something, they will just say, hey, I think we're not hiring because our recruitment people are not good enough. But this is just something he's saying out of the blue. He has no concrete evidence about this. My job is both to respond to his query, but also educate. If I can say this, it's very cheeky to say I educate an executive, but I try to educate him by saying, hey, listen, I've done an external benchmark. I've gathered data on all our rivals in the industry, and it appears that all of them are struggling. So it's not a matter of our team in recruitment. Everybody's struggling to attract people. So my job is also to educate certain people, at the same time provide them tools, but in a cheeky way also tell them, hey, make decisions which are based on facts, please.
Mm. So it's more of like locating the root of the problem rather than like just trying stuff and like see if it
Exactly.
works. Like maybe hiring new recruiters or like shortening your interview process. Like, yeah, okay. No, that makes
Exactly.
sense.
And
Yeah,
honestly, for your knowledge, Mohammed, we can do huge stuff with recruitment things. For instance, we have something which we call workforce planning. It's basically you plan for the workforce you're going to have the following year. Something which is very well paid. If anyone's interested in workforce planning, super well paid. And basically, you try to forecast the workforce which is about to be next year. And for this, you take huge data points. For instance, the rate of people who have gotten pregnancies, for instance, because one woman can be pregnant 9 months. What's the frequency of people being pregnant in the company, so that you can anticipate the next year? And then you can align with finance, tell them about the treasury, how much of mass salary, the salary mass that you anticipate for next year. Well, you can acknowledge that, I don't know, 25 women are going to be pregnant. So there's a lot of things that you can do to forecast how it's going to go, and inform the business to anticipate and be proactive.
I see. Yeah. Well, one thing I just wanted to circle back is like the more technical side.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like Power BI and like the Excel programming. What are like some of the
Yeah.
other technical tools? I know you mentioned Python as well. Like, what are the tools that data scientists, people, and like analytics they use on a day to day?
Of course, I will give you the whole flow of data because I like to be concrete. I don't like to talk BS. Basically, the source goes from Amazon S3. So every cloud engineer will know it if they have an AWS certification, which I encourage people. You have to do AWS certifications. So well paid, and with just a bit of training, you can achieve those certifications quite easily. I think if you just take the cloud practitioner, you will get to your brain to function very quickly. Anyway, AWS is free. Then it goes to a platform called Talent, which is an ETL. So basically, I don't know if you're familiar with ETLs, but basically, it extracts, transforms, loads the data. So ETL stands from extract, transform, load. And basically, for instance, SQL. I'm sure you're familiar with SQL. SQL is an ETL, can be considered an ETL. So I use SQL. I think it's a very easy coding language to learn. But also another one which have begun to learn. It's a tool called Talent. It's a company based in California which does ETL. So basically, how do you link up different data sets to create a data model? And it's very useful when you have lots of data sets from different locations, different countries. For instance, every country where we are implemented have maybe 100 entities. So imagine the number of data sets you're going to have. It's huge. And each data comes in a different format. Sometimes it's unclean, sometimes it's a CSV, sometimes it's not. So ETLs are the best way to convert the data to a good material to work with. Once we have switched from the ETL, we'll move to data visualization tools because the data is now supposed to be clean. So there are Power BI, which are main. The majority of business use Power BI, but some of them use Tableau. Tableau, which is more in depth in terms of analytics. For instance, you can do forecasting in Tableau. You can predict, for instance, if you have a curve saying this is the evolution, let's say, this is the evolution of profits in the company before taxes. With Tableau, you can predict based on the curve which was made before, you can predict how it's going to go. So these are some technical things that you could do in Tableau that you could not with Power BI, but Power BI provides a more UX friendly type of platform for users. So me, I prefer Power BI. And other than that, that's the end to end. Amazon S3 from the cloud, ETL, then afterwards Power BI directly or Tableau. But this is I've talked to data analytics consultant in Accenture, in the big four companies. They all have the same data flow type of mindset.
So, so two gaps I'm trying to understand here. One is all these data points that are being collected, where are they stored? Like, because I think that's a big gap that, like, a big solution to be provided is like storage solution. So I get is that all like just delegated to like AWS or what's that like? The data.
Exactly. And there is something, it's how much are we keeping of historical data? How much is this meaningful for us to keep historical data? Because if we're looking to have 20 years of historical data, it has no use for us. So there's a business decision behind it. How much do we actually want to keep to have to have useful material for us? So the time frame will depend on this once, but also on the country's data protection rules. We have a group data protection officer, and then every local data protection officer is located in a single country. And each one of them will reach out to its workforce analytics specialist and agree on a time frame for historical data. Mostly, what I found to be useful is at least 5 years of historical data. Otherwise, if we want to implement, like for instance, algorithm, train algorithm, or anything, it's not possible below that. So, but for me, having like 12 years of historical data has no sense. It has no business use for me. But AWS is for us in my current company is the only source where we store the data.
So another gap I see is data entry. Like with all these data points, who's the one actually like adding these data? Like, okay, he got laid off, or he got promoted, like plus one. Oh, she got pregnant, plus one. Like, who's the one that's like doing that? Like, what's the system there?
That's a very smart question, and I can see that you have maybe faced this question. You have maybe faced this issue in the corporate world. It's a very hard topic because people don't want to have more tasks at work. They want to stay at what, especially in Europe, people are very reluctant to do, let's say, more than what they have signed up to do. And finding a replacement is extremely hard, especially a replacement of the same quality. For instance, I will give you an example for France. We have a mandatory social reporting, a European one, which is if you don't comply to the audit requirements, because we have audits every year, and I'm responsible to answer to the auditors. If something is not compliant, our company can face a fine. And it's so hard because my responsibility is basically to rely on everyone's capabilities, method of calculation, and for instance, the turnover, which we talked about before, the calculation of turnover, I have to make it sure that whenever someone is replaced or new to its job, I have to make sure they have calculated right. So I will give you an example. I'm responsible, for instance, for KPIs which link up to the salary mass. So everything that you earn in your company in Microsoft, if I was in your company, I would know exactly how much you earn at the exact cent. But basically, I'm in charge of all the remuneration KPIs, and I see that in Colombia, she has reported 800K for the remuneration of managers. 800K, like nobody earns such a thing. And I have like controls which are made on VBA, where it signals me immediately when something is up from a certain variation percentage, which already tell me, okay, these areas you need to focus on so that you can comply, etc. So this is my way to approach things, but it's true that the human aspect of it, we are trying to implement change on that, so that we are trying to connect the systems directly to the reporting tool which we use for the auditors, because I want to erase all manual interventions because they are prone to errors. This is the only truth, which is, a human makes errors. I don't trust humans, I trust the systems. So slowly but surely, we have a strategy in place to try to connect with APIs, but also by investing in some vendors to try to connect directly the systems to the end reporting tool.
I see. Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. My throat is just going off today.
No
But
problem.
no, that makes sense. But so one thing. Okay, so this is all basic. The all majority of the data collection that happens is basically self-reported. For example, like if I like say go on a vacation, I'm using an online tool
Yeah.
to say my vacation, and that tool then saves
No,
that data point.
no,
No.
no. There's a part of it, but no, because it's mostly from payroll systems. But then when there is a part where people have to consolidate because it's a country scope, and the part where they have to consolidate. It's the one where they maybe it's gonna be on YouTube, but it's the part where they don't really perform. So it's this part, but mainly it comes from payroll systems. So for instance, when you file on your company that you want to go in vacation, there's a manual input, but then I connect directly to the payroll system from headquarters to see, okay, in this particular entity in British Columbia, there has been 17 days off taken on the month of October, but someone is going to be responsible for the whole Canadian region. And this someone, sometimes I have given you a vacation example, but sometimes it's going to be compound type of metrics where you have to compound in comparison with the number of employees. And people have not got this mathematics background. And they're going to do mistakes on the consolidation at country scope.
Yeah.
So I hope I was clear on this one.
Yeah. No. No. That definitely makes sense. Yep. Yep. Okay. No. No. This is actually the way you explained it. Like I didn't even realize that this was like such like an industry, like all these data points that like people what they do in a company. Like you find correlations. Like it's like I didn't know this before. So thank you for like go walk.
I'm glad you learned this, and I want to tell you, Mohammed, that between more than 60%, it's between an average of 60 to 75%. It will depend on the company, if it's a mid cap, low caps, big cap type of valuation at the stock exchange. But basically, companies more than 50% of the whole cash flow of the company is the salary. So basically, of course it's going to be a huge industry because it's the number one investment of any company. And I can argue with anyone that R&D or anything, cybersecurity, etc., HR is the number one cash flow of the whole company in reality.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess we'll end off with one question. So I know earlier you
Yes.
mentioned that people can do like this, like the AWS Cloud Practitioner certification. Super easy,
Yeah.
pays really well. So I want to limit your answer to this scope, which is for people who are looking to transition careers. So for example, they're already working a job, but they want to like break into this world of like analytics, data science. One, how
Yeah.
accessible is it? Like can they like just by doing like a few months training have a good chance of breaking in? The second is what are some of the skills that they need to learn if it's accessible, like something for example like say a doctor or an engineer, like you need years of prerequisite training to be eligible to break in. But is this career somewhat accessible to people, like this career path of analytics and data science? One is that, and then the second, just your advice for like the skill set, the mindset you should.
Of course, very relevant question. I hope I can help by bringing value. I think, first of all, completely feasible. Anyone who would say otherwise would be lying. It's like I was discussing with a cybersecurity engineer just 1 week ago. He told me it's completely feasible. He has not got any degree. He's a cybersecurity engineer. Completely feasible. But of course, certain functions like lawyers, doctors, which you mentioned, of course, going to be difficult. But for me, as per data analyst, data scientist, consultant in data analytics position, all of them completely feasible. What would be my approach? I would talk to people who are targeting big four companies such as EY, Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, the big four consulting groups, but also people which would target McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, etc. First, learn about SQL, the number one, the easiest language for coding. Secondly, Power BI, Tableau, because this at the end of the day, going to present to clients, present to the management. So this is the number two. And Excel, of course, I'm not even going to mention it. But if you don't master Excel, you cannot go anywhere. My approach was LinkedIn Learning, which is free, I think, for 1 month for Excel. SQL on Free Code Camp. Python and R I would do on Data Camp because you learn by doing, and every time you have a video of an instructor explaining you a little course for 6 minutes, and then you get to practice. And they have a lot of projects. Once you get at a very good level, I would advise to train on Kaggle. Kaggle is a platform where basically you have coding projects which are submitted by Google, Amazon, etc., and you try to compete with teams all across the world on who gets the most relevant code to solve this problem. For instance, personally, I solve HR codes, but there are projects from all around the world. So once you mature yourself in R and Python, I would exercise myself on Kaggle, which is free, by the way. And secondly, I forgot the question, which was the second one?
So the first one, how accessible is it? The second, what are the strategies, skills needed if it's accessible to get a success, like get a career, like break into the industry?
So yeah, I think I responded to both of them here. So and learn about the whole flow of data, not only about the end tools such as SAP Analytics Cloud or Tableau or Alteryx, which you use in the United States. Learn about the whole thing. So, for instance, I was mentioning AWS for a cloud practitioner. Then once you get it, try to get the upper certification to be a cloud architect, because to be a cloud architect, for instance, it's super well paid. In Atos, it was the highest paying job. And without a degree, you can land this certification. I think the first certification, I'm pretty sure it costs 100 US dollars. The second one, maybe you can negotiate with the L&D department, the learning and development department of your company, saying that, okay, I'm interested in cloud. Can you please, it's a win-win for the company. Can you please support me in learning about this new certificate provided by AWS, which has a whole training camp, etc. And I'm sure that your manager is going to support. So that would be my advices.
Sounds good. Yeah, SQL, Power BI, Tableau, Excel on LinkedIn Learning, Python and R on DataCamp, Kaggle, learn about complete flow of data, do like AWS certification. Okay, perfect. I'll put like a small summary as well, because this is something that I've gotten as well, questions from some people that I know that now want to transition into like somewhere in like the digital world, like this analytics,
Yeah.
not necessarily analytics, but just get like a digital type of job instead of like a manual labor job. And like this looks like like one of the best investments that you can do to like upgrade your skill set, learn about like data analytics, data science, and so on.
Of course. And one thing I would say last, but you cannot learn directly about data science if you do not have the basic skills. I know that people like the youth are, some of them are looking at TikTok seeing that, I don't know, some jobs are paying hella crazy. You need to learn about the basic first. Like, for instance, how does Python work? How does R work? How does like SQL work? SQL is such a simple language, but so useful in the business. One of the top 5 learning most in demand skills is SQL. So learn about the basic skills before diving into machine learning algorithm. Try to learn basic things before going too in depth.
Sounds good. Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I personally learned lots. I had no idea about like this big world of like data strategies, analysis, and so on, in like the HR world. So thank you so much for explaining that. And then
Of course.
yes, and thank you as well for sharing tips on how people can actually implement this, like upgrade their skill set and perhaps like have a better paying career, a better paying job. So thank you so much again for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. And then for those of you watching, I'm not sure whenever this goes out, we'll have, whenever your podcast, Muslim Game Changers, goes out, I'll put the link first thing in the description so you guys can check it out. So thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Shaheen, for being here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay.